Okay, everyone, looks like there's a critical mass of us, so why don't we go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody, to Diplomats at Work. This series is a partnership between APHIS and the Una Chapman Cox Foundation, and it's really designed to introduce audiences to the varied and important work of our Foreign Service by talking to the diplomats themselves. Just a quick word about our organization, APHIS, the American Foreign Service Association. We are the professional association and union for the U.S. Foreign Service. We have more than 16,000 members, active duty and retired, who work across 6 agencies, 6 foreign affairs agencies. You're probably familiar with the State Department. In addition to the State Department, our members work at the U.S. Agency for International Development, at the Animal Plant Health Inspection Service, at the Foreign Agricultural Service, Foreign Commercial Service, and the U.S. Agency for Global Media. My name is Naja Ruzika, and I will be your host today. Today, we're going to be talking to Agricultural Diplomat, our first agricultural diplomat at this series, Diplomats at Work, who will be talking to us about her work at the USDA Foreign Ag Service and about her experiences thus far. But before we dive into that really good content, I do want to mention just a few housekeeping items. As always, for those of you who have attended these events before, you're familiar with our format, which is we devote about 35 minutes to discussion with our guest about the topic at hand, and then we open it to audience Q&A. So you have a Q&A chat box tab on your screen. Please start entering your questions there. And then when we get to the Q&A portion, I'll read those questions out loud to Candice. Our event is being recorded. We will put the recording after we've scrubbed it. We'll put it on our website and our YouTube channel, APHISatube. So please do subscribe if you haven't already. You can catch the recording of this event and all our prior events on our YouTube channel as well. And then finally, there is a survey at the end of this event today. It'll pop up once you leave the Zoom session. It's a very brief survey, no more than 2 minutes, but please do take the couple minutes to do the survey because it'll help us bring better and better programming to you on topics that you are interested in. So now that we've done with the housekeeping items, let's get to the good stuff. I would like to welcome Candice Bruce, who is an FSO at the USDA Foreign Agricultural Service. Candice, it is great to have you here. Thanks so much for coming to talk to us today.
Hi, everybody, and hi, Naja. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here with you all, and I really appreciate that APHIS and the Una Cox Foundation is providing this opportunity for us to educate people a little bit more about FAS and our work overseas.
Well, that's great. So as I mentioned, you are our first agricultural diplomat on this program, which is fantastic. And to be honest, I didn't know that much about the Foreign Agricultural Service before I started planning for this event. I mean, beyond the obvious. And so I wonder if many in our audience today may be in the same position as I am. And so the way that I've been thinking about designing our discussion today is really kind of going from the very broad strokes, thinking about, talking about what it is that the Foreign Agricultural Service does, and then we can slowly narrow the aperture to more of the operational day-to-day, more Candice stuff towards the end of our discussion. So why don't we start off by talking about broadly, what does the Foreign Agricultural Service do? How big is it? Where do you work?
Right. So I don't think you're alone in this. I honestly didn't know much about USD or FAS before I started working there myself. So, again, like you said, many people in the audience may not know, so I'm excited for this opportunity. FAS is one of USDA's 29 agencies and offices, and we're pretty small compared to the rest of the department at large. For context, USDA employs about 100,000 people, and FAS employs roughly 1,300 people, and that includes staff in Washington and overseas. And so unlike the larger foreign service agencies like State Department, we only have about 150 officers. So we're small, but we have a really big mission. And I think that, the work that we do is really, really exciting. So our offices, we have about 100 overseas, and they provide coverage for 180 countries. And where I am right now in Miami, we cover 25 countries, which is exciting. We're considered an overseas office as well.
Wow, we described FAS as a small but mighty agency in a lot of our promo work, and that really does seem to fit the bill. Okay, so let's move into what is the Foreign Agricultural Service's role in our government? Specifically, what is the mandate? What kind of work is FAS charged with doing, and why?
So FAS is a trade agency, and we're actually one of the U.S. government's foreign affairs agencies, along with the other ones you mentioned earlier, like State Department and USAID and the Foreign Commercial Service. And we are USDA's lead agency on international cooperation, and our mission is to promote the export of U.S. food and agricultural products abroad. And this mission actually, and the exports of U.S. food and agricultural products supports more than 1 million American jobs. So you see right there that the context is important. Although we are a small agency, we really do have a direct impact on the American economy. So just to give you a broad idea of the work that we do, we can break it down into 4 basic components. And they consist of trade policy, where we try to prevent and remove trade barriers. And we work with our foreign governments to open markets for U.S. agricultural products. We help support the negotiations of free trade agreements. And we work with international institutions like the World Trade Organization or Codex Alimentarius, which is the international standard setting body, to strengthen the rules-based trading system and ensure that trade is transparent and predictable. We also do trade promotion and work to expand exports at large. And this is what I personally consider to be the fun part of our job. So we have trade missions where we will take buyers or exporters overseas to meet in person with potential buyers. We do trade shows and recruit missions so that they can display products at these trade shows and also meet with potential buyers. And then we also do in-store promotional activities, social media campaigns, and just a wide range of marketing events. And this is where our offices can get really, really creative. We do market intelligence, and we advise U.S. decision makers. We go out in the field and we, speak to our contacts. We collect data. We look at local crop production. And what I think is really amazing about FAS is that our reporting is public. So if you go to our website, you can actually pull up reports from all of our offices overseas and find out what the market looks like in a particular country and what the regulatory structure is and what it takes for you to export into that market. And the last component that I wanted to talk about a little bit is capacity building. And this one also is near and dear to my heart because this is where we really help foreign governments and foreign countries really participate in their international trading system. And we also do food assistance programs that aren't just focused on nutritional needs, but also support agricultural development and education in different programs. So that's really just the heart of our work. And I think as we continue our conversation, we'll draw out more examples from those components.
Great. Thank you for that. That is really helpful foundational information. You mentioned that FAS has some 100 offices around the world covering 180 countries. Can you tell us more about these offices? What do they do? Are you in an embassy? Do you collaborate with other U.S. diplomats in country and so on?
Absolutely. So most of our offices are overseas in an embassy or consulate abroad. Again, my office where I am now, we're in Miami, but everyone else usually is overseas. We have 2 different offices. One's an Office of Agricultural Affairs and another is an Agricultural Trade Office. Every country does not have both. Some only have the Agricultural Office of Ag Affairs. But primarily the difference is that one office focuses on policy work, and that's what the OAA, and the other offices focus mostly on marketing work. You do have exceptions, and we all collaborate together. So in larger countries, Mexico or China, you'll have a policy office, and they have several marketing offices. Here my office in Miami, for example, is very small. So we do primarily the policy work, and we also do marketing on top of that. To talk a little bit about how we work with the embassy at large. So we are the lead agency for international agriculture and agriculture in general. Our head of post overseas represents the Secretary of Agriculture. And while FAS's primary mission really is to promote the export of U.S. ag and food products overseas, we represent the Department of Agriculture at large. So when things happen that are related to issues outside of FAS's mission, we do facilitate that work. So we sit alongside everyone else, the rest of the agency and section heads and country team meeting. We are the ambassador's primary advisors on agricultural issues, and we participate in the embassy fully, not just on the policy work, but also in the broader mission issues or areas such as, housing board or what we call the ICAS committee, which focuses on the mission's operations and budgeting. We work on the commissary committee. So we really encourage for our officers to be involved in the larger embassy activities at large. And, you will find overseas that several FASers actually chair some of these committees and working groups for the embassy.
That's great. So as we learned from our previous Diplomats at Work guests, there are other teams at the U.S. Embassy that you just mentioned who also work on connecting U.S. businesses to international markets. And I know that the U.S. Agency for International Development also has agricultural programs, capacity building programs as well. So tell us about how you work with them, or FAS works with these other teams, and how is the work that you do different from, or I guess complementary to what they're doing?
That's a great question. Like I mentioned before, our mission is very focused on trade and export promotion, and USAID has a mission that's focused more on development. And so we do work together. All of the mission areas do. We also work with the economic team and the regional environmental officer, because agriculture is part of the larger economic commercial teams at the embassy. So we collaborate, very, very closely with all of our colleagues overseas, because at the end of the day, even though we have our own specific mission, the objective really is to achieve the U.S. goals and objectives for that particular country. And collaboration is so important. And I think I mentioned earlier that we have about 100 offices in 180 countries, right? And so I think people are probably wondering, how do we do that, right? How do I, even here in Miami, cover, 25 countries? And that's because we work so closely with our colleagues overseas, with the econ teams, with USAID, to make sure that we are all working towards the same goal. I failed to mention that we have what we call locally employed staff overseas, and these are foreign nationals who work for us, and they really are the backbone of our work. We couldn't do our work without them. And sometimes when we don't have an officer in a particular country, we may have our locally engaged staff in a country, and that's another way in which we're able to provide such good coverage around the world when we're such a small agency. In situations like this, even though I may be in one country, for example, when I was in Costa Rica, I was based there, but I had locally employed staff in both Nicaragua and Panama. And that also increases our collaboration with the commercial officer or the econ officer, because they provide the daily oversight for our teams there and work really closely to make sure that we're all coordinated.
Yeah, and the locally employed staff tend to stay on for a long time, right? So they provide that continuity of coverage, and they probably have great relationships, that because by virtue of being there for so long, great relationships with local entities. So
yeah, they really do. They're our institutional knowledge.
Yeah.
As officers, we rotate every 3 to 4 years, but our locally engaged staff, they stay on with us. They're amazing, and they provide the access. They know the countries better than we do. They have access that we would never have. So we very much rely on their work. And, our team for FAS is just incredible. We have such impressive local staff all over the world.
That's wonderful.
As does every other agency, but I think our staff is always the best.
Of course. So let's switch to you now that I think you've helped us kind of understand from broad to more specific how the work of FAS looks and how the work of a agricultural diplomat may look. But let's switch to you specifically. As an ag diplomat, you've served in Peru and Costa Rica. You're now the director of the Caribbean Basin Agricultural Trade Office. That's a mouthful. Can you tell us more what this actually looks like in practice? Like, what does your day-to-day look like? Obviously, I know posts can look very different. They vary from post to post. So maybe we can start with your time in Peru and how that went.
Yeah, so Peru was my first post. So, that formed the foundation for everything that I've learned in the Foreign Service. And, everybody will say that there's no typical day for an agricultural attaché or an ag diplomat. And that's true. So I'll just tell you, some of the work that we happen to do when we're overseas. So we are part, again, of the country team. And so every week we meet with the ambassador and the rest of the section heads. Every week we probably would have an econ or a trade team meeting where we collaborate closely with econ, the Foreign Commercial Service, et cetera. In Peru, I was regional. And so I also covered Bolivia and Ecuador out of that post. And we had staff in Ecuador. So we had a commitment to the ambassador that somebody needed to be there for a week every month. So we traveled a lot. And then we also traveled to Bolivia. And the work there, Peru is wonderful because we've really had an opportunity to touch on every single component of FAS's work that I talked about before. Like for trade policy, for example, they have a Peru-US trade promotion agreement. And that was being implemented while I was there. So we worked really closely to monitor and to watch this trade agreement and to make sure that it was being implemented properly. But at the same time, this agreement had a capacity building chapter in it. And this goes back to your question earlier about, how do we collaborate with other USG agencies, for example. Part of the capacity building that we worked on was an agricultural capacity building. And so USAID, through an agreement, funded a lot of agricultural activities and technical capacity building programs that we used because we had the expertise internally within USDA to do that. And so that's another way in which we work together. Sometimes an agency might fund someone else's work. One of the best parts of my job, I think, I went on an amazing coffee trip there, going back to the data and analysis, where we literally drove from Lima over the Andes Mountains into the high jungle to look at coffee production in Peru. And we were there for about 2 weeks. And, I honestly got to see parts of the country that I never thought I would see. And then we take that information, we speak to the contacts, we find out what coffee looks like in Peru for that year. And we go back and we write a report about that. And that report now is publicly available to inform, both Washington and US stakeholders about what coffee production in Peru looks like. So you can see that we had like a wide range of activities. We did some really fun marketing and promotion events. We had a Great American Thanksgiving Food Showcase one year at the ambassador's residence, because we work really closely with our U.S. ag industry groups. We call them cooperators, and they represent different sectors of the agricultural industry. And to do our marketing and promotions, they help us to, have products and help us with the promotional activities. And we brought our local contacts and the importers there and basically had, Thanksgiving at the ambassador's residence. And that was just such a special, incredible event. So that shows you, I think, how our work and those 4 core components that we talked about, how it works. The day-to-day, though, I have to be honest, sometimes you're bogged down in just administrative things and paperwork. Every day is not a day in the field, but the days in the field, I think, and the days where we are actually actively working on accomplishing our mission is really fun. In Ecuador and Bolivia, we had food assistance projects. So we would go out into the field and meet the NGOs that were implementing those projects. We would be able to go and meet with the beneficiaries of those products. And that's really a special time and to see how, your work from the office has a direct impact on people overseas.
That sounds wonderful. Your trip to the coffee farm sounds like a dream work trip. So let's switch then to Costa Rica. You went from Peru to Costa Rica, and I think you covered even more countries there.
I did. Right.
How did that look?
Actually, when I left Peru, I actually went back to Washington for 2 years, where I covered the World Trade Organization, and I was also a desk officer for China and Taiwan. In the Foreign Service, they say that you spend about 2/3 of your career overseas. Mm-hmm. And with this assignment in Miami, I'm probably right at about that balance. So I did go back to Washington for a couple of years, and then I went out to Costa Rica, as you mentioned. And from there, I covered Nicaragua and Panama. Again, just 3 very dynamic countries. And, the experience was really incredible. They're so different. And that's one thing I've noticed is that, you can't take for granted that countries in the same region are the same, because they're absolutely not. And there's so many nuances, there are cultural differences, there's trade policy difference, there's just a difference in every country. So I really enjoy being regional and having that responsibility. Costa Rica, also, we had a trade agreement in Costa Rica, and Nicaragua was part of it. It's the Central American Dominican Republic U.S. Free Trade Agreement. And so we still had the same kind of monitoring and monitoring the implementation of that agreement. But Panama had a trade promotion agreement as well. So we had 2 separate trade agreements that we were watching while we were there, in addition to some other big trade policy issues. One thing that was really nice about being in Costa Rica is that one of our implementing partners for a lot of our programming, which is the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture, it's a long name. We call them IEGA. They are actually based in Costa Rica. So while I've worked with them in places like Peru or Ecuador in the past, being there and being able to work with them, side by side where their headquarters was a good experience. And I learned more about their work and how they can help us to achieve our mission ultimately overseas. In Nicaragua, we had several food assistance projects there. And so I think I saw parts of Nicaragua that most people never get to see. And that also is very special, again, to see how our programming impacts people on a daily basis and on a very real basis.
It sounds like it's both professionally, but also personally really gratifying to do this type of work. There's a lot of growth that happens in both of those. Professional and personal sectors, I guess. I'm going to switch gears just a little bit. Thank you for telling us about your time and your day-to-day work, as much as it can be called day-to-day. So how it looks in practice to be an agricultural diplomat. Switching gears to talking about your approach into the Foreign Service. So we do frequently get asked, how do people get into the Foreign Service? Like, is there, a set path? And sometimes there is a set path, but frequently there is not, or is not a clear path into the Foreign Service. And from talking to you before, I know that yours was kind of an unusual path into Foreign Agricultural Service. So I'd love for you to talk to us a little bit about how you got to where you are now.
Yeah. So I absolutely did not have the traditional path into the Foreign Service that many of our colleagues had. I mentioned earlier that, I wasn't familiar with the work of FAS before I started working there, and I really wasn't familiar with the work of USDA. And I think that just shows that we hire a wide range of people that we can bring in and train. But, I was an English and public relations major in college, and I was very interested in working in sports communications. I thought that was my path. If you would have told me 20 years ago, this is where I would be, I would have laughed in your face and said, there's no way. So I actually applied for an internship with USDA doing, marketing and working on some of the marketing programs that I was just talking about. And I got the internship. And I said, okay, sure, I'll go to Washington and be an intern for the summer. I was in college, why not? sounds like a great opportunity to get some good experience. And never did I think in my life that it would be so interesting and that agriculture would be so fascinating that I would want to come back. So I did. I loved it. And I interned for FAS for 3 summers between undergrad and grad school. And actually, FAS just changed the whole trajectory of my academic career as well. I thought I would go to grad school for communications originally, and I decided that I wanted to leave space for me to come back to FAS if they would ever hire me back. So I changed and I decided to go to grad school for international affairs, and I made my concentration economics because most of what FAS employs, most of us are economists. So I wanted to make sure that I had enough of the credits that I needed to come in as an economist for USDA. And so that was very purposeful. And it worked out. I ended up coming back. I learned something new every single day. I think agriculture and trade is a fascinating area. And I just think people don't understand or know enough about how much they're impacted on a daily basis about what we do and what USDA does. So I was completely, just kind of blown away from that one internship experience. And I just think that people should definitely consider looking into places like FAS that maybe they didn't think about before. Maybe you think you don't have an agricultural background. I didn't either. And I've now been in the agency for 16 years, and I've been in the Foreign Service for 13 years. And, I love my work and I love what I do every day. And, it's really opened my eyes to a whole new world.
That's amazing. And the fact, knowing that what you do definitely impacts all of our lives here back in the States, I think must be extra gratifying as a professional. So I understand that FAS is currently doing a big recruitment push. Can you tell us a little bit about this and what opportunities might be available?
Yeah. So that's right. We have what we Foreign Service Trainee Assessment coming up. And Foreign Service Trainee is what we call the new class of individuals that we bring in to ultimately convert into Foreign Service officers. So right now we are definitely trying to get the word out there so that people will apply and that people are interested and will continue to look at us as a potential agency for employment. We have 2 public information sessions coming up. One is April, I believe, and the second may be April 3rd. And there are some links, I believe, that you all have to drop into the chat in case people have questions and if they're interested in knowing more about that. So I would really encourage anyone who's interested in FAS or interested in learning more about the Foreign Service and what we do to attend those public information sessions. And if you are at a point in your career or in your life where you can apply to the Foreign Service exam, that vacancy announcement should be coming out in early May. And we would really like to see, just a great group of candidates to come in and work with us and try and apply to our Foreign Service.
That's great. So
there's
we'll
a few things I have to add,
Go ahead.
Okay.
We have a little
I was going to say, as much as I love this career, I know we have a little bit of a delay. I love this job, but I want to say too, something about that's important for people to know in advance is that, the Foreign Service, it's a commitment, right? It's a lifestyle. And if you are interested in attending the seminars and learning more about that, they'll talk about that. But I have this platform. So I wanted to say and to explain that, we rotate every 3 to 4 years. You literally uproot your life every couple of years. You move to a country where you don't know anybody and you start over completely. I'm an Army brat, so I'm used to moving, but, moving internationally really is different than moving domestically with my family. And we also require a security clearance and a medical clearance, just like the rest of the Foreign Service agencies. So I just wanted to let everybody know that there are some things to be aware of when you try to apply to the Foreign Service. But I say go for it. We're open, we're available, and we're always here to talk and to chat about our work.
That's great. And so we have since dropped the links in the chat. So you guys can take a look when we're finished. We'll also send these links out in an email to everybody who registered after the event. So this is not your only chance. But as Candice said, keep your eyes open and definitely think about all the different paths you can take, including this one for a foreign service career. So that was the end of my questions for Candice. So why don't we switch to your questions for Candice? I'm seeing the chat box fill up. So I'm going to start. I would like to be able to get to all of your questions, but it may not be possible. So I'll hope to get through as many as I can. So why don't we start with the following? Can you tell us, Candice, about your favorite project to date and why? I'm sure it's like picking children. So maybe, I know it might be hard, but one of your favorite projects, I guess.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier, I do love the food assistance projects. I really do love what we do in educating children and feeding children, and working with the schools and the NGOs is really, really special. So, but I'll tell you about my favorite experience, if that helps.
That helps.
So we hosted, I mentioned before, we have trade missions where normally a high-level USDA official travels to a country and they take a delegation of exporters with them to meet in country with the local importers. And we took a trade mission to Panama City several years ago when I was posted in Costa Rica. So, one of our undersecretaries hosted it. We had a really large delegation. I believe at the time, it was the largest trade mission that we had had to date. And as part of the trade missions, we often do site visits. And this one was incredible because we took the team into what is now the third set of locks of the Panama Canal expansion. And we literally went down and saw how they were building out, the new set of locks that the post-Panamax ships passed through. And I believe they flooded that about 20 days later. And so that was truly, like a once in a lifetime opportunity. And I'm embarrassed to say, but I left a little piece of my hair down there. So there's always like a little piece of me in the Panama Canal. But, that's something that you will never do again. Somebody will never walk on the bottom of, the Panama Canal again. So that was really, really, just I think my favorite experience by far.
That sounds amazing. Yeah. What's the most challenging part of your job, an agricultural diplomat's job?
Well, in addition to moving every few years, which I think I just mentioned in uprooting your life, I would say that, you have to quickly kind of become an expert on different issues depending on what's happening in your country. So I think a colleague of mine said it best, in some jobs you have to be an inch wide and a mile deep, but in FAS you have to be, like a mile wide and about 5 inches deep. And you may not know day to day what the issue is. And, but you have to go and talk to people that in some cases know a lot more than you about the topic and negotiate and, engage on behalf of the U.S. government and U.S. agriculture. But we do have a wonderful team. People are very, very supportive in this job. We have a wonderful team of experts back in Washington who make sure that you're prepared for that. But I think that can be challenging because some people, you really have to step outside of your comfort zone, especially for somebody like me who didn't actually have an ag background. And, I've had to learn a lot. I learn something new every day. And for our, senior leaders as well, I think they're surprised sometimes. I had an ambassador once say that when he came to the country, he never knew that he would have a PhD in agriculture. And, I think that just goes back to, just how engaging our work is, but how important it is and how much you have to learn in order to effectively, represent the industry.
Great. So I'm going to combine, I see a couple questions on this general topic, so I'm going to combine a couple. It's a question about FAS, applying for FAS. And I don't know if you'll know the full answer, but you'll know part of it. Do you know how many people FAS may be taking? And what does the application process look like?
Okay. So applying for FAS will be through the USA jobs announcement for the Foreign Service, and that's how you would apply to any FAS job at large. If you go to FAS's website, which is www.fas.usda.gov, there is a section there that says about, and you look there, and then there's a career section. So just so people can easily navigate, and I can send you all the link later. And that will show civil service jobs in Washington, and also the process for, becoming a foreign service officer. So once you pass the initial job vacancy announcement, if you're selected through that process, then you will be invited to take the foreign service assessment later on. But the first process really is that USA jobs vacancy announcement, and you have to apply to basically take the foreign service trainee assessment. In terms of how many people they will take, I really don't know. I don't think that there is a set number. And I believe that, just whatever happens in the test, then they look at how many openings they have. And, your name sits on a roster for a while. And, I think but it takes a long time, even if you are, I think, selected or offered a job opportunity. The process for obtaining a security clearance and a medical clearance, that does take several months. And so it's not a fast process. If you are offered a position, and if you pass through the security and the medical part, if you say that you're worldwide availability, and we literally have to sign that we are worldwide available, then you come to Washington and you'll work for 2 to 3 years, and you'll have on-the-job training, and you'll have a lot of formal training to prepare you for the job, and then you will bid and go overseas. So it's a long process, but it's worth it. And I will tell you why that's worth it, and why you spend 2 years in Washington. When I started, it was before they changed the process where you could just apply into the Foreign Service. We actually had to work as civil servants in FAS first, and then we could apply to take the exam and go overseas. And now it's the opposite. You apply to take the exam, you're in the Foreign Service, and then you bid and go overseas. But the reason we do that is because, our offices are very small. So we may have, 1, maybe 2 officers at every post. And when somebody's gone, you as the junior officer have to be able to navigate and pick up in that space. So we talked about Peru a little bit earlier. When I went to Peru, I was pretty young. I think I was FAS's youngest officer in the field at the time. And I was in country for a total of a week when my manager said, "Hey, I am going on vacation for 3 weeks. The office is yours." And, that was terrifying for a first-time officer. In hindsight,
sounds like.
Yeah, exactly. In hindsight, I think it was great because it gave me an opportunity to really bond with the local staff and to get to know the embassy without having my manager hover over me. But there are stories like that around FAS, and they want to make sure that you're prepared for that when that happens. And so had I not, worked in FAS for 2 years, I would never have to reach back. I would never know how the office functioned as well. And it would have been more of a struggle than it was. But it worked, it worked out well. And then later on, at the end of that year, I think I was at post for about 7 months, that same manager got a wonderful opportunity within FAS in Washington and had to go back for another position. And I was by myself for 6 months before my new boss came in, and I had to run a regional post. Again, as a junior officer, my first tour, my first year out. And, FAS, to be fair, they were going to send somebody temporarily to work with me. But I had an amazing ambassador who said, "Don't do it. We will support you through this. And this is a good opportunity for you." And, I stayed there by myself, and, it turned out well. I think ultimately it helped me, but you have to be prepared. And that's why, although it sounds, like a really long time to sit in Washington for 2 to 3 years, when you're overseas, you value all of the education and everything that you learn when you're there.
That's great. We have someone here who writes that they're applying for an APHIS position, FSO position at APHIS, which is the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, also part of USDA. How does FAS and APHIS, how do they relate to each other? And are the roles distinctive, or is there any overlap?
Well, there's definitely some overlap depending on the issue. As the name suggests, APHIS's mandate is really to protect, animal and plant health. And many of our issues overseas relate to APHIS issues specifically. APHIS actually is a small, they have a very tiny overseas presence, the same way that FAS does, and we are all regional as well. APHIS is regional, and so we do coordinate closely with them on issues. Sometimes I've only been in a post one time where APHIS was present. And so even on things sometimes that may be APHIS issues, we will engage closely with them, but sometimes we will work the issue in person for them. So that again goes back to the collaboration and how we work with, our counterparts. We make it work and it works out well, but they are our colleagues. They are our sister agency. The APHIS team that we work with here is based in the Dominican Republic, and we talk to them often, just like everywhere I've talked to, all of my colleagues often. In Costa Rica actually was special because we had APHIS and FDA at our embassy there, and that is very, very rare. And so we actually formed what we called a Food 3 group for all of the agencies, the three of us that work together on food issues, so that we could collaborate more closely, because we do work with FDA as well, and we work with APHIS. So to have us all there, and we were all regional with a lot of overlap for the same countries, it just really helped us to, better move forward.
Okay. Switching gears again. Next question is about languages. How do you, can you please discuss how you manage with different languages? Do you speak another language before joining the Foreign Service? And are you placed in a particular post based on your knowledge of a certain language?
Some people come in with language skills, but everyone does not. I spoke some Spanish before I entered FAS, but when I was assigned to Peru, I went into formal language training. So to stay in the Foreign Service, we are all commissioned officers, and part of your commissioning means that you have to be language qualified, and that will be tested. And so we will make sure if you don't have a language, then you will receive some language training at some point. And normally it coincides with the country that you're going to for your first post. But everybody's a little bit different, so it's not a hard and fast rule on how that works. But what is important is that you do have to be language qualified. There is no flexibility in that. You will not maintain a career in the Foreign Service without being commissioned, and part of that is language. So for me, I commissioned in Spanish. I am in the process of trying to learn French because I cover the French Caribbean here in Miami. And so I'm working on that. But I have colleagues who know 5 or 6 different languages. It's really amazing. I did both of my tours in Latin America. So obviously Spanish was my focus, but people that are more varied in their geographic, locations and their postings have more languages.
Yeah. So, okay, now again, switching gears. I'm sorry, we're a little bit all over the place, but hopefully this keeps it spicy. Someone writes in from Costa Rica. Greetings from Costa Rica. And the question is, when you were here, there was a big trade dispute regarding avocados. And then last week, there was a big dispute with the US and Mexico on avocados. While there are different types of disputes, can you share your perspective on how these kinds of disputes can affect your job, both as a trade advocate and a diplomat?
Yeah, and actually when I was in Peru, we helped to open the US market for Peruvian avocados. So I've had avocado, there's a lot of avocado issues. And I met the president of Peru because the opening of the US market was such a big deal to them that the president was personally involved. But in terms of what's happening right now in Mexico and what happened in Costa Rica, you're right, there are 2 totally different issues. in Costa Rica, the avocado market closed mostly to Mexican avocados, but the United States, I believe specifically the state of Florida, and this was several years ago, so I'm kind of operating on what I remember, due to a plant health disease. And so this, really was something that APHIS really worked on to reopen the market for avocados. And, that's something that we just engage in. You continuously plug away. I believe in Costa Rica, there were about 8 countries affected. And, at the time we did work with other missions and other embassies to engage on that issue and to see if we could reopen the market. So while the US was, just very, very minimally affected, I don't even think that the US was shipping avocados to Costa Rica at the time. It really was Mexican avocados that were mostly affected. And I remember that was, dinner time news that people did not have, avocados there. And so, but now what's happening in Mexico is a different situation, but also I think the United States is feeling the impact of, the market being closed.
Yeah. Next question. Do FAS Foreign Service officers get to work on projects involving climate change or sustainability goals?
We do. And I don't know how many people here have heard about the Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate, but that is a big push of the Biden-Harris administration. And so since the rollout back in November, we have been working with the partner countries who have decided to join this initiative, which is called Aim for C, to work with them so that they can properly, implement and be a part of this new initiative, which focuses on, climate change and agriculture, basically. So there's an Aim for C ministerial that happened this week, actually. And so I'm really interested to hear what comes out of that and what's coming up next.
Great. Okay. Moving on. This is a pandemic question. I'm surprised we haven't gotten more of these, but how has your role or not changed during the pandemic? Have you had to deal with the supply chain issues that have been impacting all of us currently?
So I started my job in Miami a little bit over a year ago, so right in the middle of the pandemic, and I have not been able to travel to any of the 25 countries that I represent. And I've never been in a situation when I've been at post and regional where I haven't been able to travel. There's really no substitute for that in-person cooperation and collaboration. So I've had to, do my job just like we're doing now, virtually, and get to know the contacts virtually. And I hope that we can get on the ground soon. So that has been, difficult. It's been a challenge in how we operate. It's been a challenge in how we can implement some of the activities we would like to do, some of the capacity building activities, some of the marketing activities. It's been hard because we have not been able to leave. So we hope to move. And then, I'm sorry, I think I missed the second part of the question.
If you've had to deal with the supply chain issues that are affecting all of us.
Overseas, not a ton, but recently we did have, for example, an inquiry from an importer in one of my countries who said their supplier wasn't able to supply them anymore. So then we went back to one of our cooperator groups that I talked about earlier that represents the US industry and found suppliers for them. So we can facilitate some of that when these issues happen. Fortunately, we haven't had too many issues in my region, but I know that this is a global challenge and, hopefully it's resolved soon.
Yeah, I hope so too. Okay, I think we have time for 2 more questions. I'll do one back to sort of life and work in FAS, and then one more about the work of FAS. Okay, so the first one is there a degree or other work experience that you recommend, based on your earlier answer, I think no, for working at FAS? And what do you think a person needs to have in order to succeed at FAS, meaning personal characteristics or specific skills? And then it's a 3-parter question. Any other recommendations that you have for applying, for someone who would like to apply to FAS?
Great. Well, I love the interest in that people are, want to know what we need to apply. So in terms of the degree, I mentioned that a lot of people are economists or have some sort of background in data and analysis, but we also have animal science majors or, international affairs majors. And so there are some requirements, and I don't have them right in front of me, but if you look at the links or email the people from the links, they can tell you more about that. But definitely, because so much of our work is focused on trade and data and analysis, having that kind of background is very, very helpful in this career. I think I mentioned that, that's why I decided to do my concentration in economics, because I wanted to have that foundation. In terms of, and I'm sorry, I know it was a 3-part question. So
I don't mind repeating. The second one
okay.
is, what kind of skills do you think someone needs in order to be successful at FAS? Is it like, skills, like technical skills, or personal characteristics, things like that?
Okay. So technical skills are important, don't get me wrong. Everybody has to do their job. We all have to succeed and make sure that we are properly representing FAS. But I think more broadly, and not just for FAS, but for the Foreign Service at large, good judgment is so important. Because when you're overseas and you're representing the US government at large, it's not just about your job, it's about the entire mission. And things happen suddenly, and you are not prepared for them, right? And so you have to be able to react and respond accordingly. And good judgment is such an important part of that. Being flexible and being adaptable and really just being resilient. I think those are some really, really important personal characteristics that you need to have in order to make this job work.
And then the last part of that question was if there are any additional recommendations from you about for any, to people who are interested in applying for a job at FAS.
Yeah. Well, FAS is a great agency. And if you apply to FAS and if you get into FAS, I would recommend also trying to rotate around as much as possible. That is something that if you come in as a Foreign Service trainee, that we make sure that you have experience in pretty much every program area so that you learn, the policy, you learn the capacity building, you learn about the marketing and the trade promotion, because when you're overseas, you're doing all of that work. So just making sure that you're very wide and very broad and you have a good range of experience. Every post that we have is a little bit different. I was in Peru and Costa Rica where we had capacity building programs, we had policy issues, but we have some offices, like we have an office in Geneva at the World Trade Organization that really deals with, trade policy day in and day out, right? And we have other issues that deal with policy. We have some issues that are very, very heavy on, some of the capacity building and the food assistance programs. So it really helps to have that experience when you're in Washington and to take advantage of it. So that would be my best advice, is that when you come into FAS, make sure you just soak up everything that you possibly can, because you don't know what situation you're going to be in. And then, have fun. This job it's fun. It's fun to be in the Foreign Service. It's fun to get out overseas. And I really, truly enjoy the embassy environment. And so if you're in the Foreign Service, I'd say, take advantage of that. You learn so much from your colleagues when you're overseas, when you sit in the office next to them. There's agencies that, I never thought that I would learn about or know so much about. And there's certainly people that, in my day-to-day back in the States, I think that I would never run into in my social circle. And meet those people and to get to work with those agencies overseas, it's just a different experience, and I really, really enjoy it. So I think just, stay open-minded and soak up every experience, even the bad ones. They're always a learning experience.
For sure. If that's not a ringing endorsement for all of you guys to apply to the Foreign Service, I don't know what is. Okay, the last question, and we really are out of time, is the following. How does your work help contribute to global food security?
Wow, that is a great question. And
you got a couple minutes to answer.
I would say, Yeah, well, we know that trade is an essential part of food security, right? So having us to facilitate trade and to make sure that, high quality US agriculture and food products get overseas, we're essentially helping to feed the world. And, it sounds very simple, but it really is that. And then ultimately as well with some of our food assistance programs, we are directly involved in the feeding of people overseas,
Yeah.
which is really, really important. But, when you're trading food and when you're supplying food to other countries, then they typically have access to food and it definitely helps us. So what a key component and an important part of our work really is to contribute to global food security. And it's a great part of our mission.
Well, great. Thank you for that. We are out of time for Q&A. Thanks to everyone who submitted questions. I'm sorry if we didn't get to your question, but there's only so much time. Thanks again, Candice, for taking the time to talk to us and for giving such an excellent presentation about the work of FAS and about what it really means to be an agricultural diplomat. I think this has been such a helpful and eye-opening presentation, at least for me, and from some of the comments that I see, others think so as well. So again, big thanks for that. So I think this is it for us. We've dropped the links in the chat box if you guys are interested in looking at the links that Candice had mentioned. We will also put them, as I said, in an email that we'll send to all folks who registered. We'll also send along the recording of our video once it's scrubbed and ready to go, but you can also always catch it on our YouTube channel. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter and our distribution list for these events if you're interested in seeing more of them. It's at events@aphsa.org. Just send us an email there and we'll sign you right up. And don't forget to take the survey at the very end so we can have more excellent programs like today's with Candice. So thanks again to everybody. Thank you again, Candice, and see you guys next time. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay.